If there's one thing my 30s taught me, it's this. Silence isn't peaceful when someone else forces it on you. Silence becomes a cage. And if you're not careful, you start believing you deserve to stay inside it. My name is William, 33 years on this earth, born in Ohio, currently living alone in a modest apartment in Portland, Oregon. Welcome to my channel. Please click on the subscribe button so you won't miss out on my new stories. And this is the story of how the people I loved the most tried to silence me, and how heartbreak pushed me into becoming someone they could never ignore again. I remember the morning everything changed. It was early, around 6:30 a.m. Fog still hugging the streets. The kind of Portland morning where even your breath looks tired. I was sitting on the tiny balcony outside my apartment, hands wrapped around a mug of burnt coffee, because I still hadn't figured out how to make it properly. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. A simple text, just one sentence. But it cracked something open inside me. We need to talk. Those 4 words ruin lives. Trust me, you don't get a "we need to talk" at 6:30 a.m. unless your soul is about to get microwaved. I stared at the screen, and for the first time in months, I felt it. That heavy, sinking feeling you get when your heart already knows the truth before your mind catches up. Her name was Ava. We'd been together for almost 3 years. A woman with ocean blue eyes, the most addictive laugh I'd ever heard, and the kind of smile that could convince a man he still had good things coming in life. But she was also the reason I was staring into cold coffee that morning, waiting for a message that would flip my entire future upside down. Before I continue, let me paint a picture of who I was back then. I wasn't the version of William you might imagine. Not confident, not outspoken, not the YouTube storytelling William speaking to you now. Back then, I was the guy who apologized too much, who made himself smaller to make others comfortable, who loved so loudly but spoke so quietly that nobody ever heard him. I was the kind of man who believed silence made relationships easier. Silence, and holding everything inside, hoping love would be enough to fill the gaps. But love isn't magic. Love isn't self-sustaining. Love, real love, needs honesty. And I had no idea how to speak without fear of being misunderstood, judged, or dismissed. So I stayed quiet, until silence became the reason I lost everything. Ava texted me again. "Can I come over?" I typed yes without thinking. My hands were shaking. Not because I was scared of losing her, but because I already knew I did. When she arrived, she didn't even hug me, just walked into my apartment like someone entering a courtroom. She sat on the far end of the couch, leaving more space between us than I'd ever felt in my life. Her voice was soft, controlled, rehearsed. "William." I blinked. My throat tightened, but I stayed quiet. Not because I had nothing to say, but because for 3 years I had gotten so used to swallowing my emotions that speaking felt foreign. She went on. "You don't open up to me. You don't tell me what's going on in your mind. You've become so distant, and I feel like I'm begging for a version of you that doesn't exist anymore." That part hurt, because I did exist. I was right there. I was screaming inside my own head, but no one heard me because I didn't know how to let the words out. I never learned how to say, "I'm scared. I'm overwhelmed. I need support. I'm hurting, too. I'm trying, but I don't know how to be enough for you." Instead, I nodded like some trained pet, acting calm, while every muscle in my body wanted to break down. Ava sighed. "I met someone who listens. And that was the dagger. Not the heartbreak, not even the betrayal. It was the truth behind it. I had made myself so small that someone else stepped into the space I left empty. I should have said, "I can fix this." I should have said, "Don't go." I should have said, "I'm hurting too." But I did what quiet men do. I swallowed my pain. I lowered my head, and I whispered, "Okay." That whisper ended us, just like that. 3 years gone. A future erased. A home we talked about building dissolved into thin air. She left with a final, "I hope you understand," but I didn't. I still don't. The days that followed were the darkest winter of my life. I'd wake up to a quiet apartment, too quiet. Her toothbrush wasn't next to mine anymore. Her jacket wasn't hung behind the door. Her perfume didn't float in the air. Everything felt dead. Including me. I stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping, stopped talking to my friends, stopped being William. Work became a blur. Emails felt meaningless. Even breathing felt like something I had to remind myself to do. But the worst part? The world kept moving. Everybody kept smiling. Everyone looked normal. And I felt like a ghost. Heartbreak does that. It makes the world feel like it's excluding you. Like happiness is a language you no longer understand. Weeks passed, then months. People around me started giving me that, "You should be over it by now, look." They didn't know how many pieces I was still in. They didn't know heartbreak doesn't disappear. It just gets quieter, like background noise you learn to live with. But something shifted the day I visited my mom. Not because of anything she said. Actually, she didn't say much. She just hugged me, looked me in the eyes, and told me, "Baby, pain will bury you if you don't speak." That was all. A simple sentence. But it opened a door inside me. A door I had locked for decades. I realized something that day. Ava didn't silence me. I silenced myself before she ever tried. And I was tired. Tired of being unheard. Tired of being misunderstood. Tired of being invisible in my own life. So I made one decision. One that terrified me. I decided to start talking. Really talking. Not the polite, surface-level conversations I was used to. Not the "I'm fine" lies. Not the fake calmness I wore like a shield. I started journaling. Therapy sessions. Voice notes where I spoke like someone finally learning his own voice. I talked to myself. I talked to God. I talked to empty rooms. And slowly, my voice returned. But more importantly, I started to understand that silence wasn't my personality. It was my coping mechanism. I had spent my whole life lowering my volume so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. But heartbreak forces you to confront yourself. And when you finally do, you realize something. The real you was never meant to be quiet. The breakthrough didn't happen all at once. Healing isn't a movie montage. It's messy. It's sleepless nights. It's crying in your car after holding it together all day. It's missing someone you know wasn't good for your mental health. There were days I hated Ava. Days I missed her. Days I wanted her back. Days I prayed I'd never see her again. And all of it was normal. But the real turning point came on a random Saturday. I walked into a bookstore, Powell's Books, just to distract myself. I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed to be around pages that weren't mine. And I stumbled on a book about emotional communication. I opened it, read one paragraph, and felt my entire chest tighten. It said, "Silence isn't peace when it comes from fear." I bought that book, read it in 2 nights, and cried more than I expected. It felt like someone finally put a name to the thing I'd been wrestling with my whole life. That book started a transformation, a slow, uncomfortable rebirth. I started speaking up at work, started saying no without apologizing, started expressing annoyance, sadness, even joy without overthinking. My voice was shaky at first, but it was mine. And the more I spoke, the more I realized how many people were just like me, quiet, holding everything in, bleeding internally with a smile on their faces. One morning, months after Ava left, I woke up at 4:12 a.m., couldn't sleep. The sky outside was still dark blue, with a quiet rain tapping against my window. Portland rain is a different kind of rain, soft, patient, like it's whispering instead of falling. And, for the first time in so long, I felt peace. Not because my heart was fully healed. It wasn't. But because I could finally hear myself again. That morning, sitting on the same balcony where Ava's text shattered my world, I whispered something I never had the courage to say before. I deserve to be heard. And that was the sentence that changed everything. You don't become impossible to ignore by getting louder. You become impossible to ignore by becoming yourself. My healing wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some Hollywood comeback. It was quiet, internal, powerful. The kind of growth nobody claps for because they don't see it. But it reshapes your entire existence from the inside out. Healing is strange. People assume it feels like progress, like waking up stronger every day. But the truth? Healing feels like confusion most of the time. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. There were mornings where I felt like I was finally breathing again, and nights when a single memory of Ava walking out my door could rip the air right out of my lungs. But no matter how inconsistent the journey was, something inside me kept whispering, "Don't go silent again." And that whisper slowly became my anchor. Every morning, I created a new ritual for myself. I'd wake up around 6 a.m., Portland still asleep, sky barely awake, and I'd walk to the same little coffee shop a few blocks from my apartment. The place was old, rustic, wooden floors that creaked under your steps, a brick wall full of handwritten notes from customers, a yellow sign outside that constantly flickered as if the bulb was tired of its job. But it felt like home. The barista, an older guy named Martin, knew my order without asking. "Americano, no sugar," he'd say every morning, sliding the warm cup across the counter with a knowing smile. He never pried, never asked about the sadness I tried to hide, and I appreciated that more than he knew. Sometimes, silence from strangers is comforting, because it's not the kind that demands anything from you. I'd sit by the window, watching the traffic lights switch colors on empty streets while people rushed toward lives that seemed far more put together than mine. And every day, I wrote. Not full paragraphs, not fancy journal entries, just pieces of thoughts. Sometimes it was, "I don't know who I am anymore." Other times, "I miss being loved." Or, the most honest one, "I'm scared I'll never be enough for someone." And even though writing those words hurt, something about seeing my fears in ink made them easier to confront. One morning, something unusual happened. I was staring at my journal, hand frozen above the page, when a young woman walked into the coffee shop. She had short, curly hair dyed honey blonde, freckles across her cheeks, and the kind of fashion sense that made you think she put effort into her outfits without overdoing it. She was carrying a sketchbook, smudges of charcoal on her hands, and she looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. The kind of exhaustion heartbreak gives you. She ordered her drink, sat at the table nearest mine, and let out a sigh that could have narrated a whole story. For reasons I still can't explain, I found myself looking up. Our eyes met. She offered a tired smile, not romantic, not flirty, just human, the kind of smile that says, "I'm trying." She opened her sketchbook, and that's when I noticed it. A half-drawn portrait of a man with gentle features and sad eyes. Her fingers trembled slightly as she shaded around the jawline. In that moment, I realized healing doesn't only happen around people you know. Sometimes strangers reflect back the parts of you you're too scared to look at. She never looked at me again, never tried to start a conversation, but something about her presence made me write a little easier that morning. And when she left, she dropped a small folded note on my table. No name, no phone number. It simply said, "Your eyes look like you're learning to breathe again. Don't stop." I never saw her again after that day, but that note lit a spark I didn't know I needed. Slowly, my life began to rearrange itself. Not perfectly, not dramatically, just enough to make mornings feel a little less heavy. I started jogging again, started cooking actual meals instead of living off takeout. I decluttered my apartment, threw out old clothes, replaced my worn-out couch, even changed the curtains. But the most important change happened inside me. I started learning how to speak honestly. It began in therapy. My therapist, Dr. Harris, was a woman in her mid-50s with calm eyes and a voice that could quiet a storm. She had a way of making silence feel comforting instead of crushing. The first day I sat in her office, I didn't know what to say. My heart was swollen with emotions, but my tongue refused to cooperate. She waited patiently. Then she asked, "William, what scares you the most about being honest?" I swallowed hard. My voice cracked when I answered, "Being misunderstood." She nodded gently. "Misunderstanding is painful, but silence is lonely. Which hurts you more?" That question stayed with me for weeks. Misunderstanding hurts, but silence? Silence destroys you from the inside out. So I practiced speaking my truths, even when my voice shook like a loose window during a storm. I told Dr. Harris about my childhood, my emotionally distant dad, my people-pleasing tendencies, my fear of conflict, my habit of shrinking myself because I believed my emotions were too heavy for anyone to carry. And as I shared all these pieces of myself, I realized something. Ava didn't break me. She exposed the cracks I had been ignoring for years. Heartbreak wasn't the cause. It was the catalyst. The first real turning point came unexpectedly. It was a Friday night. Cold, windy, and raining hard. The kind of Portland weather that convinces you God is washing the whole city like a dirty plate. I was home, scrolling through old photos like an idiot searching for closure in pixels. Then my phone buzzed. A message from a number I knew too well. Ava, everyone says don't check it. Don't read it. Block, delete, move on. But heartbreak doesn't work that way. Curiosity and pain are siblings. Her message said, "Hey, I wanted to apologize for how things ended. I've been thinking about you. Maybe we can talk?" My chest tightened. My hands went cold. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me still loved her. And another part hated myself for even considering replying. I stared at the message for almost 30 minutes. Then I did something the old William never would have done. I spoke, not to her, to myself. I said out loud, "You don't get to break me and then come back when your new world falls apart." Those words tasted like truth, like freedom, like closure I didn't know I was capable of giving myself. Then I typed back, "I appreciate the apology, truly. But I'm healing, and reconnecting would reopen wounds I'm finally learning to close. I wish you well, Ava." And I hit send. My hands shook for 5 whole minutes afterward. Not from sadness, from power. For the first time in years, I chose myself, and something inside me shifted forever. It felt like exhaling after holding my breath for too long. That night, I slept peacefully. No nightmares. No tossing and turning. Just quiet, but this time, the quiet was mine. Not forced. Not empty. Just mine. I woke up a different man. Not completely healed. Not completely confident. But more aware. Aware that heartbreak didn't end my life. It redirected it. Aware that I wasn't weak for breaking. I was human, and aware that my story wasn't over just because someone stopped loving me. Weeks passed, and life continued to shift. I met new people, not romantically, just socially. Neighbors I had ignored for years started recognizing me. The lady at the front desk of my building started greeting me with an extra warmth. Even Martin, the barista, noticed the change. "You look lighter," he said one morning. I smiled for the first time without forcing it. "Feels like it," he nodded. "Breakups are storms, but storms don't last forever." He had no idea how much that meant to me. One sunny afternoon, rare for Portland, I did something completely out of character. I attended a small community event at a local park, music playing softly, people painting, kids running, couples holding hands, dogs dragging their owners around like tiny furry dictators. I sat on a bench with a lemonade, feeling like a foreigner in my own happiness. And that's when a stranger sat beside me, a man in his 40s, with a camera strapped around his neck and a warm expression. He looked at me and said, "You have the face of someone who's lived more than he says." I laughed awkwardly. "I guess I have." He extended his hand. "Name's Theodore, photographer." I shook his hand. "William." He studied my face briefly. Not in a creepy way. In a thoughtful way. Then he said something I'd never forget. "Men don't get enough space to feel. The world tells you to man up, but the world doesn't know what it takes for a man to heal quietly." I froze. He wasn't wrong. He continued, "Whatever you lost, you didn't lose yourself. I can see that." I didn't understand how a stranger could read me so well, but his words stayed with me long after he left. Healing isn't linear, but encouragement, even from strangers, can shift your entire trajectory. One night, while sitting on my balcony, watching the stars fade into clouds, I realized something monumental. For the first time since the breakup, I no longer felt the urge to check my phone for her messages. I no longer played our old voice notes. No longer stalked her social media. No longer rehearsed fake conversations in my head. It was like waking up one morning and realizing the wound had closed without you noticing. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but it closed. That realization brought tears to my eyes. Not sad tears. Freeing tears. I whispered again. I deserve to be heard. But this time, another sentence followed naturally. And I deserve someone who listens. The next shift in my healing journey came on a Tuesday. Not a special day. Not a memorable one. Just a regular Tuesday where the clouds hung low over the city and the air smelled like rain and old pavement. I was on my usual morning walk, hands deep in my jacket pockets, earbuds in but no music playing. I didn't need sound. I just needed the illusion of it. A barrier between me and the world. As I walked past a neighborhood shop, I heard someone call out, "Hey, you dropped this." I turned around. An elderly woman, gray curls, thick glasses, sweater with knitted cats on it, hurried toward me holding a note. My journal note, a small page that must have slipped from the pocket where I kept my scribbles. She handed it to me gently. "Didn't want you losing this." The note? It simply said, "I'm learning to choose myself." I smiled a little. "Thank you. I appreciate it." She looked at the paper, then at me. "Tough time?" I nodded. "Something like that." She patted my arm the way only grandmothers know how. Soft, comforting, like she'd known me for years. Then she said something so simple, yet so grounding. "Honey, healing is not about forgetting. It's about remembering, without breaking." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't want to, but because her words hit a part of me I hadn't touched yet. She walked off, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with the morning light brushing against my face. And for the first time, in a long time, I didn't feel alone. Time kept moving, slowly, but with intention. And with every day that passed, I found myself rediscovering pieces of life I had abandoned. Like cooking. One evening, out of nowhere, I decided to make dinner. Not microwaved meals or frozen stuff. Actual dinner. I chopped onions. Badly. Burned garlic. Over-salted the chicken. But the smell filling my apartment reminded me that life could still be warm and comforting. Cooking became therapy. It grounded me. Reminded me that not everything required perfection, just effort. Around this time, I also began reconnecting with my oldest friend, Jason. Jason and I grew up together in Ohio. The kid who always dragged me into trouble. Always pushing me to speak up, even when my voice trembled. We drifted apart over the years, not because of conflict, just life. He called me one evening, out of the blue. "Dude," he said, "I just realized you've become a ghost. What's going on with you?" And for the first time in months, I didn't hide. I told him about Ava, about the breakup, about losing myself in silence. And Jason, being Jason, responded in the most Jason way possible. "Bro, you're not a candle. Stop letting people blow you out." I burst into laughter, real laughter. The kind that shakes your chest and leaves you wiping tears from your eyes. It felt good, healing, even to be reminded that friendship still existed, where I didn't have to pretend I was okay. We talked for almost 2 hours that night. Not about heartbreak. Not about trauma. We talked about life. Stupid high school memories. Dreams we abandoned. Plans we still wanted to chase. Jason reminded me of a version of myself that existed long before heartache. Long before anxiety. Long before I believed silence was safer than honesty. He reminded me I was still that kid somewhere underneath the hurt. A few weeks later, something happened that shifted the trajectory of my life again. It was a Sunday morning. The air was crisp, sunlight slipping in through my blinds in soft golden stripes. I made coffee and sat at my desk with my journal. The room felt peaceful. The kind of peace you don't appreciate until life teaches you how dark the world can get. As I flipped open my journal, one sentence practically jumped off the page. Maybe my silence wasn't weakness. Maybe it was waiting. I didn't remember writing it, but it stuck with me. That day, I picked up my phone and recorded a voice note, not for myself, not for a therapist, not for anyone specific. Just to release something trapped inside. I said, "Heartbreak didn't destroy me. It introduced me to the parts of myself I never bothered to meet." When I finished recording, I played it back. The voice didn't sound broken anymore. It sounded aware, alive, present, and that's when I felt it. The urge to start speaking publicly about my journey. Not because I wanted validation, but because I knew there were thousands of people out there who felt like I did. Silent, hurting, unseen, unheard. I wanted them to know they weren't alone. That evening, I posted the voice note anonymously on a small online forum. No name, no face, just words. I closed the app and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to hundreds of messages. People saying, "I felt this in my soul. This is me right now. Thank you for saying what I've been scared to admit. I needed this today. Your voice feels like the one I didn't know I was waiting for." I stared at the screen, stunned, speechless. All my life, I thought silence made me invisible. But now my voice, the one I used to hide, was reaching people I didn't even know existed. And that did something to my heart. Something powerful, something freeing, something healing. For the first time in my entire adult life, I realized my story mattered. My voice mattered. I mattered. From that moment, I began sharing more. Slowly at first, random thoughts, short reflections, little voice notes, and strangers resonated, connected, replied with their own stories, their own heartbreak, their own struggles. It felt like the universe was whispering, "You were never meant to stay quiet." And deep down, for the first time, I believed it. Then came the day I least expected. The day I saw Ava again. It was raining. Because, of course, it was raining, and I was walking out of a grocery store, paper bag in hand, rushing to my car. And there she was, standing by the entrance, hoodie up, hair soaked, eyes locked onto mine the moment I turned. My heart didn't race. My chest didn't tighten. My hands didn't tremble. Instead, I felt something strange. Calm. A calm strong enough to hold oceans. She approached me slowly. "William." "Hey." I nodded politely. "Hey." Her eyes searched my face like she expected to see the broken man she left behind. But that man was gone. "You look different," she said. "I am," I replied softly. She smoothed her wet hair back and sighed. "I've been meaning to reach out again. I know things didn't end well. I hope you're okay." And she meant it. For the first time, her words weren't rehearsed or defensive. But I didn't feel the need to say much. Didn't need closure. Didn't need apologies. Didn't need her story. I simply said, "I'm healing. And I'm good." She gave a small, sad smile. "I'm glad." And then she walked off into the rain. No tears fell from my eyes. No pain twisted inside my chest. No longing tugged at my heart. Because for the first time, seeing her didn't feel like losing anything. It felt like confirming how far I'd come, how much I'd grown, how much I had reclaimed. I didn't become impossible to ignore by shouting. I became impossible to ignore by rising quietly, slowly, deeply, into the version of myself that always existed beneath the fear. And that version was just getting started. I walked out of that grocery store with a strange calmness sitting in my chest. The kind that doesn't rush, doesn't brag, doesn't panic. It just exists. Quiet, balanced, solid. The air outside was cold. Mid-February in Portland always felt like the city was trying to remind you it had teeth. But for some reason, I didn't feel the cold the same way I did a year ago. A year ago, everything felt icy. Every breath, every morning, every memory of Ava. Everything about life felt like walking through winter without a jacket. But now it felt like I was carrying my own warmth. I crossed the street, hands in my coat pockets, replaying every second of what just happened, not with regret, but with understanding. Because seeing Ava again didn't destroy me. It didn't unbalance me. It didn't pull me backward. If anything, it pushed me further forward. And for the first time, I let that sink in. You know, people always talk about closure like it's something someone else gives you. A sentence, an apology, a second chance, a reason. But sometimes, closure happens exactly like it did for me that day. When you realize the person who once held your world doesn't even hold your pulse anymore. The version of me who begged her to stay didn't exist anymore. And the version of me that stood outside that grocery store He didn't need anything from her. Not a sorry. Not an explanation. Not a memory. Nothing. That was the closure. I decided to take a walk later that day, replaying the encounter, to see how far I've grown emotionally. I kept walking, past the bakery where Ava and I used to steal croissants before work, past the cafe where she once cried because I bought her the wrong coffee, past the exact corner where she told me the words that shattered me for months. I think we want different things. Back then, those words felt like death. Now, they just felt like information. Isn't it crazy how time rearranges the meaning of things? I breathed out slowly, watching the fog leave my mouth and fade into the air, exactly like she had faded out of my life. And for once, I wasn't chasing the fog. I took a left toward the harbor. Portland's harbor always had this strange way of grounding me. Maybe it was the water, maybe the open sky, maybe the sound of waves that didn't care what you were going through. And I leaned against the railing, staring at the water, shifting under the gray sky. Every relationship has an echo, a version of yourself you left behind, a version of them you still remember, and a version of both of you that only exists in your mind. For a long time, my echo with Ava was loud, but today, it finally felt like a whisper. Let me tell you something about heartbreak, especially if you're listening to this because you're healing from one. Sometimes, the hardest part isn't letting the person go. Sometimes the hardest part is letting the version of yourself who loved them go. And that version of me, the William who bent until he snapped, who kept forgiving until he forgot himself, who loved until it broke him. I had to bury him to become this William. The William you're listening to today, the one who survived the storm, the one who rebuilt himself from dust and doubt. While I stood there, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jason, my oldest friend, the one who saw me at my lowest, the one who literally sat in my living room while I couldn't get off the floor. Jason. Will? You good? You disappeared again. Me. Just taking a walk. Jason. Ava again? I stared at the message for a second. Old William would have lied. Old William would have said, no, never, while drowning in his feelings. But new William? New William didn't hide from the truth. Me. Yeah, saw her today. I'm fine though. Jason. You sure? Me. Yeah, really. Jason. Proud of you, man. I put my phone back into my pocket and let those words settle. Proud. Someone was proud of me. And for once, I felt proud of myself too. I decided to keep walking along the water because the day felt too important to rush. Every step felt like I was walking away from a grave I'd spent too long visiting. And in the middle of that moment, something happened that I didn't expect. I smiled. Not because everything was perfect. Not because I had it all figured out. Not because I had replaced Ava or healed completely. I smiled because I wasn't carrying her anymore. The truth is, heartbreak changes you. It shows you parts of yourself you didn't know existed. The soft parts, the angry parts, the lonely parts, the parts held together by hope and fear. But it also reveals the strongest parts. The resilient parts, the parts that refuse to stay broken, the parts that rebuild even when you think you can't. And as I walked, I could feel all those pieces of me reorganizing. Not around Ava, but around me. There was this older man sitting alone on a bench further down the harbor. He must have been in his 60s, jacket zipped up to his chin, hat pulled low, hands tucked deep in his pockets. As I passed, he looked at me briefly, not in a creepy way. Just that intuitive, human way older people look at you when they've been where you are. He nodded at me. I nodded back. Then he said something that stuck with me. You look like you finally let something go. I stopped. How'd you know? I asked. He smiled slightly. Son, I've lived long enough to know the difference between someone who's carrying weight and someone who finally put it down. I didn't have an answer. I just stood there, letting the words hit somewhere deep. He chuckled softly. Don't worry, she'll be fine. You'll be better. And just like that, he went back to staring at the water. I walked away stunned because it felt like a stranger had summarized an entire year of my life in one sentence. As the sun started sinking behind the skyline, I realized something else. I wasn't afraid of the future anymore. I wasn't replaying the past. I wasn't questioning my worth. I wasn't hoping she'd return. I wasn't wishing things turned out differently. I was just here, in my life, in my body, in this exact moment, breathing air that didn't hurt. That kind of peace hits different when you've lived without it for a long time. I stopped by a small food truck and bought a cup of hot chocolate, something I used to avoid because Ava always said it was too childish. Funny how you change yourself in relationships without even noticing. I held the warm cup in my hands and whispered to myself, I get to like what I like again. And that felt like freedom. The sky turned from gray to a soft, bruised blue. The city lights started flickering on. Portland always looks better at night, like a city tightening a blanket of lights around itself. And as I walked home, I realized something profoundly simple. I wasn't walking away from Ava anymore. I was walking toward myself, toward the man I was becoming, toward the life I was building, toward the things that actually mattered. And for the first time in a long time, that felt enough. When I reached my apartment building, I paused at the door not because I was sad, but because I wanted to acknowledge the moment. The old William would run inside, distract himself, bury the feelings, avoid everything. But new William? He took a breath. He grounded himself. He walked in with purpose. My apartment was warm. Soft yellow light from the lamp by the window. The faint smell of cedar from the candle I lit earlier. My jacket tossed over the chair. My notebook open on the table. This was my space. My peace. My home. Ava never lived here. Ava never broke anything here. Ava never touched this version of me. This apartment held no ghosts. I dropped my keys in the bowl and sat on the couch. The quiet felt comforting, not lonely, not empty, just mine. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered, I'm okay. And for the first time, I truly was. Healing doesn't feel like fireworks. It doesn't feel like a movie ending. It doesn't come with applause. Sometimes healing feels like this. A quiet evening in a warm room, after a long walk by the water, where you finally admit to yourself, I survived something that almost destroyed me. And even though Ava was gone, I wasn't. I was still here, still fighting, still growing, still becoming, and I wasn't done yet, not even close. I woke up the next morning with a strange sense of anticipation, not because I expected something from the world, not because I hoped for Ava's return, but because I realized life had a rhythm again, one that I could feel, that I could shape. The sunlight poured softly through my blinds, painting stripes across the worn wooden floor. My apartment, which had once felt like a cage after the breakup, now felt like a sanctuary. I made coffee, black, just the way I liked it, and sat at my small kitchen table, staring out at the quiet city below. For a long time and months, I didn't reach for my phone first thing in the morning. I didn't check for messages. I didn't relive old conversations in my head. I just breathed. And I wrote about Ava, not in anger, not in longing, not in pain. I wrote about her as a part of my story that had shaped me, nothing more, nothing less. Ava taught me how fragile love can be, but also how resilient the heart is. I am learning to hold both lessons at once. I paused and smiled. It felt right. Later that day, I went for a walk along Stevens Creek. The city was bustling, but I felt detached from the chaos in a way that wasn't loneliness, it was clarity. People rushed past me, earbuds in, coffees in hand, umbrellas clashing against the gray sky. Yet, I felt calm, untethered from any expectation. I watched a father teach his young daughter how to skip stones. The simplicity of that moment struck me. Life didn't have to be complicated to be meaningful. I realized something important. I had been complicating everything. My love, my heartbreak, my healing by holding on too tightly to what I thought should be. I had clung to Ava, to the past, to the pain, because it was familiar. But freedom, I discovered, lies in letting go. By mid-afternoon, I found myself in a small, cozy bookstore I had passed a dozen times but never entered. It smelled of old paper and dust, the kind of scent that carries stories you haven't yet lived. I wandered through the aisles, my fingers tracing the spines, until a section of memoirs caught my eye. I picked up a book, The title something about overcoming heartbreak and discovering self-worth. I flipped through it, more interested in the idea of seeing someone else's journey than in the advice itself. But reading it, I felt a strange kinship. Their words mirrored what I had been experiencing: the disorientation, the longing, the slow reclamation of self. I bought it. Not because I needed guidance, but because it reminded me that I wasn't alone. That even when you feel like you're walking through darkness, someone, somewhere, has found the light. That evening, I returned home and made dinner for myself. A small victory, but a meaningful one. I had been surviving on takeout and cold cereal for weeks after Ava left. Cooking felt therapeutic, grounding me in the present moment. I chopped vegetables, seasoned the chicken, and watched the water boil on the stove, feeling connected to the rhythm of life. While eating, I reflected on the past few months. How much had changed? How much had I changed? I realized I had begun to recognize patterns I hadn't noticed before. The way I silenced myself to avoid conflict, the way I let fear dictate my choices, the way I withheld my voice in the hope of preserving relationships that were never healthy in the first place. And now, I understood something essential. I didn't need permission to exist fully. I didn't need anyone else to validate my worth. I only needed myself. The next few weeks became a rhythm of discovery. I started journaling every morning, walking every afternoon, and cooking dinners that were increasingly ambitious. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from, allowing myself to be present, honest, and sometimes vulnerable. One Friday, I met Jason for lunch. We sat at our usual spot near the waterfront, watching the river glint in the early afternoon sun. He had a grin on his face, the kind that implied he knew something I didn't. "You look different," he said, handing me a cup of coffee. "I feel different," I replied honestly. "Yeah?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "You finally moved on from Ava?" I considered the question. The old William might have said no, shaking with uncertainty. But the new William spoke with certainty. "I don't need to move on from her," I said. Jason nodded, impressed. "Good. I'm proud of you, man. Really." By late February, spring started teasing the city with hints of warmth. The days grew longer, and the harsh winter air softened just enough to make walking enjoyable again. I spent more time outside, more time interacting with the city I called home, and more time understanding that happiness wasn't something to chase, it was something to cultivate. I began volunteering at a local community center on weekends. Teaching a creative writing workshop to teenagers was unexpectedly fulfilling. Their enthusiasm, their raw emotion, and their unfiltered stories reminded me of what it felt like to be fearless with my voice, to be fully human without shame or hesitation. And every time I guided them through an exercise or read their work aloud, I realized that I was helping them avoid the silence I had suffered through. I was turning my pain into purpose. One evening, I found myself at a small poetry reading in a local cafe. The dim lights, the smell of coffee and pastries, the hushed murmur of people sharing their vulnerabilities, it felt like home. I listened as strangers poured their hearts into words, each story raw, fragile, and beautiful. When it was my turn, I hesitated. The old William would have refused, would have told himself he wasn't good enough to speak. But the new William stepped forward. I took a deep breath and read a passage I had written in my journal. "I loved fiercely. I lost painfully. But I stand today unbroken, unshaken, unapologetically myself." The room was quiet for a moment, then soft applause followed. Not overwhelming, not fake, but real. I smiled, feeling a connection that was unfamiliar, yet deeply comforting. For the first time, I realized that my voice could resonate beyond my own experience, that my story could inspire someone else. Weeks turned into months, and spring fully arrived. I started running along the river every morning, the cool breeze brushing my face, the rhythm of my heartbeat keeping pace with my steps. Running became more than exercise. It became meditation. Every mile was a mile away from old fears, old heartbreak, old self-doubt. One morning, As I paused to catch my breath, I noticed a woman sitting on a bench nearby, sketching in a notebook. She looked absorbed, calm, focused, and for a fleeting second, I remembered the note from the stranger at the cafe months ago. Your eyes look like you're learning to breathe again. Don't stop. I smiled to myself. It was funny how life sometimes gave you reminders in the most unexpected ways. By early summer, I had started dating casually. Nothing serious, no expectations. Just the simple act of sharing moments, laughs, and experiences with someone new. I wasn't searching for Ava. I wasn't trying to replace her. I was just opening myself to the possibility of connection again. And one evening, while walking through Boston Common with a new acquaintance, I realized that I could be present, truly present. I wasn't haunted by the past. I wasn't anxious about the future. I was here, now, breathing, smiling, living. It was a quiet victory. But it was significant. And then came a turning point that I hadn't anticipated. Ava reached out again. This time, it was a voicemail. Short, hesitant, polite. William, I just wanted to say, I hope you're doing well. I know I hurt you. And I hope you found peace. I listened to it, felt the words, but didn't spiral. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I didn't replay every memory. I simply sat back, took a breath, and whispered to myself, I have found peace. And I truly had. I realized then that love isn't just about two people. Love is also about how you treat yourself after it ends. Love is about reclaiming your life, your joy, your voice, and your sense of worth. Love is not a chain. It's a choice you make every day to honor yourself. And in that moment, standing in my apartment, overlooking the city I had learned to love again, I understood something profound. I had not only survived heartbreak, I had grown because of it. I had discovered resilience. I had reclaimed my voice. I had become impossible to ignore, not by forcing anyone to see me, but by learning to see myself. This is their mate. Summer in Portland stretched lazily into July, the city alive with heat and laughter. Cafes spilled onto the sidewalks, street musicians filled corners with rhythm, and the river glittered gold under long afternoons. I walked these streets with a lightness I hadn't felt in years, every step a reminder that I had survived, rebuilt, and reclaimed myself. One evening, I found myself wandering through the Kearns neighborhood. The narrow streets, lined with brick brownstones and tall, flowering trees, held a quiet magic. The sun was sinking, and its golden light touched everything. The water, the cars, the buildings, as if life itself was affirming that beauty still existed, even after heartbreak. I stopped near a small park and sat on a bench, watching kids chase each other, dogs bounding after frisbees, and couples laughing in the grass. And somewhere deep in the back of my mind, Ava's memory surfaced, fleeting, but not painful. Just a whisper, reminding me where I had come from, how far I had walked. I realized that healing wasn't a straight line. It was a series of steps, sometimes forward, sometimes sideways, sometimes a full stop, but every step mattered. Every choice to stand up, to speak, to move, to love yourself, mattered. As I sat there, my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't expected, Ava. I stared at the screen. My thumb hovered over the phone, but I didn't feel panic or temptation. I didn't feel anger. I just felt calm. Her text was simple. Hey, I don't expect anything. I just wanted to say, I hope you're happy, truly. I smiled. Not because I missed her. Not because I hoped for reconciliation. But because I had arrived at a place where someone wishing me well no longer stirred longing. It stirred gratitude. I typed back, thank you. I am. And I hope the same for you. Sent, no more, no less. I pocketed the phone, leaned back against the warm wood of the bench, and let the city hum around me. For the first time, I understood that some people are meant to pass through your life, not to stay, but to teach, to challenge, to show you what you're capable of when everything falls apart. Ava had done that. And now, I was free. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into life. I rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned: photography, hiking, journaling, late night walks through the city, and I noticed small joys that I had previously overlooked. A perfectly brewed cup of coffee. The way sunlight hit a puddle in the street. The laughter of strangers passing by. Life was happening all around me, and I was finally awake to it. I even started sharing my journey online anonymously at first, posting reflections on heartbreak, healing, and self-discovery. The response was overwhelming. Messages from strangers telling me that my words helped them process their own pain. Stories of others who had been silenced, afraid, or broken, and who had found hope in my voice. I realized then that my story wasn't just mine. It had a ripple effect, and the very thing I had once thought of as weakness, the heartbreak, the silence, the struggle, had become a source of strength for others. One particularly warm evening, I found myself back at the harbor, leaning against the same railing where I had once seen Ava. The water stretched endlessly before me, reflecting the pink and gold of the sky. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and felt the weight of everything I had carried finally lift. It was in that moment that I made a promise to myself. I would never allow anyone or any pain to silence me again. I would speak, live, and love boldly. I would embrace life fully, with all its uncertainty, heartbreak, and beauty. And I would not just survive, I would thrive. A few weeks later, I met someone new. Her name was Claire. I met her at a local photography exhibit. A quiet, unassuming woman, with a love for capturing candid moments in life. She smiled easily, laughed softly, and carried herself with a grace that immediately drew me in. We started spending time together, slowly, without expectation. Coffee dates, walks through the park, conversations that meandered into the night. I didn't rush. I didn't try to force anything. I simply existed alongside her, enjoying her presence, sharing my world, and learning hers. For the first time, I realized that love wasn't just about passion or intensity. It was about connection, mutual respect, patience, and the courage to show up fully. And with Claire, I found that courage blossoming in a way it never had before. One night, sitting on the rooftop of my apartment building, city lights twinkling below, Claire turned to me and said, "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" I nodded, smiling softly. "Yeah, more than I ever thought I could handle." She took my hand in hers. "And yet, here you are, still standing." I felt a warmth in my chest. Not the nervous, panicked warmth I had felt with Ava. Not the aching longing. This was calm, solid. "Sure, I am," I said. "And I'm stronger because of it." She squeezed my hand. "Good, because I like strong people." I laughed. A full, easy laugh. "Well, lucky for you, I had a lot of practice." Through the summer, life unfolded in small, profound ways. I traveled a little on short trips to nearby towns, exploring places I had never seen before. I met new people, learned new things, challenged myself physically and mentally. Every experience, no matter how mundane or extraordinary, became a piece of my healing journey. And every night, when I returned home, I would reflect, write, and remind myself of the lessons I had learned. Love yourself first. Speak your truth. Do not let pain define you. Embrace life fully, even when it's messy. People pass through your life for a reason, but you are the constant. By late summer, I had become a version of myself I barely recognized. At first, confident, grounded, and deeply aware of my own value. I no longer feared being alone, no longer needed external validation, and no longer allowed old fears to dictate my choices. And then came the most surprising moment of all. I realized that my story, the heartbreak, the silence, the rise from the ashes, had made me ready for real love again. Not the kind of love that consumes you or blinds you. Not the kind that forces you to shrink yourself to fit someone else's expectations. But the kind that grows quietly, steadily, beautifully, and intentionally. With Claire, I discovered that love could feel like a warm breeze on a cool day, comforting, alive, and steady. One evening, as we sat by the harbor watching the sun dip below the horizon, She turned to me and asked, "Do you ever think about her?" I looked at the sky, the water, the soft glow of city lights, and then back at her. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But not in the way that hurts. I think about her as a chapter in my life. A chapter that taught me how to survive, how to grow, and how to love myself. I'm grateful for it. But it's over. That chapter isn't who I am anymore." She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. I liked the sound of that, and in that moment, I realized something profound. The pain I had endured, the silence I had suffered, and the heartbreak I had survived, had not only shaped me, it had prepared me for life, prepared me for joy, prepared me for love that is patient, kind, and real. By the end of that summer, I finally understood the truth I had been searching for all along. I didn't become impossible to ignore by fighting the world. I became impossible to ignore by becoming fully, unapologetically, and undeniably myself. And that version of William, strong, healed, aware, and alive, was finally ready to step into the next chapter of life, fully awake and fully present. Because sometimes, the greatest love story isn't about two people. It's about the person who survives, rises, and refuses to be silenced. And that person was me. By the early days of autumn, Portland had transformed again. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and faint smoke from chimneys. The city streets were alive with color golds, reds, and oranges blending with the gray of the sidewalks. It was the kind of season that demanded reflection, and I found myself walking along the Stevens Creek once more, notebook in hand, capturing thoughts and feelings I hadn't yet fully processed. Claire had come into my life softly, quietly, as if the universe was reminding me that love could arrive without urgency, without chaos. Our connection was effortless, filled with laughter, honesty, and a shared curiosity about life. For the first time, I understood that love didn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful. It could be steady, nurturing, and real. Yet, in the quiet moments when the city slowed, when the river reflected the pale sky, I felt the ghost of Ava lingering. Not in pain, not in longing, but as a shadow of a chapter that shaped me. I realized that closure isn't about erasing memories. It's about integrating them, letting them exist without letting them control you. One rainy afternoon, I received an unexpected call from her. Her number appeared on my phone, and for a moment, a familiar tension fluttered in my chest. But I steadied myself. I didn't flinch. I answered with calm certainty. "Hello?" I said. "William," she said, voice soft, almost fragile. I wanted to talk." I exhaled slowly, looking out the window as rain streaked the glass. "Okay." We met at a quiet cafe in Cambridge. She arrived first, drenched slightly, looking nervous. The familiar sight of her eyes cautious, her posture guarded, brought memories flooding back. But they didn't shake me. I was present, grounded, aware of who I had become. When she saw me, she hesitated. And for a moment, I wondered if she had remembered the man I used to be, the one who had crumbled when she left. But then I noticed something. The way her eyes scanned me. The way she braced herself for a reaction, as if unsure if she would find the broken William she expected. I didn't give her that. I smiled gently. "Hi, Ava." She returned the smile, small and tentative. "Hi. Thanks for meeting me." We ordered coffee, sat down, and a heavy silence settled. Neither of us rushed to fill it. The air was thick with unspoken words, but I didn't feel panic. I felt curiosity, awareness, and control. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry," she finally began, "for how I left things, for how I hurt you." I nodded slowly. "I appreciate that." She hesitated again, searching my face. "Are you okay?" I looked at her calmly, without anger, without resentment. "I'm more than okay. I'm better than I've ever been." Her eyes widened slightly. "Better than me?" I laughed softly. "Better than the William who existed when we were together. The one who relied on you for his happiness." That man is gone. This man. This man stands on his own. For the first time, I saw recognition in her eyes. Not admiration, not envy, but acknowledgement. She realized the truth. The man she left behind had not only survived, he had thrived. We spoke for hours. Not about the past, not in detail, not in blame, but about life, growth, and perspective. She admitted mistakes, expressed her own regrets, and shared how she had tried to navigate life after our separation. I listened. I responded. I didn't dominate the conversation. I didn't prove myself. I simply existed, confident, present, and unshakable. By the time we stood to leave, I realized something profound. I didn't need her validation. I didn't need her forgiveness. I didn't even need her acknowledgement to feel whole. That chapter had done its job. Its purpose had been fulfilled. As she walked away, I didn't feel lost. I felt complete. After that encounter, life flowed with a renewed sense of purpose. I spent more time with Claire, exploring the city, traveling to small towns, trying new experiences. I embraced a routine of self-care, reflection, and growth. I immersed myself in work, hobbies, and friendships that nourished me. One crisp Saturday morning, we hiked along the trails of Blue Hills Reservation. The leaves crunched beneath our feet, and the sky was impossibly clear. We reached the summit and paused, looking out over the sprawling city below, rivers glinting in the sunlight. Claire turned to me, her eyes shining. "You're different," she said. "Not like anyone I've met before." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with pride. "And did you?" she asked. I nodded. I did. And now, I get to share that with someone who sees it, someone who chooses to be present with me. Her hand found mine, fingers interlacing naturally. "I like being present with you," she said softly. And that moment, standing on a hilltop, the city beneath us, autumn wind in our hair, it felt like everything I had lost. Every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of despair had led me here, not as a victim of heartbreak, but as a survivor who had transformed pain into wisdom, fear into courage, and loss into clarity. Weeks later, I returned to Stevens Creek alone, notebook in hand, to reflect on the journey fully. I wrote about Ava, about Claire, about myself, about the evolution I had undergone. I wrote about heartbreak, resilience, and the quiet power of self-reclamation. And then, I wrote something I had never dared to write before. I am whole, I am worthy, I am free, and I will never again allow anyone or anything to silence me. I closed the notebook, feeling a calm certainty settle in my chest. That statement wasn't bravado. It wasn't wishful thinking. It was true. Because I had lived it, I had fought through it, I had reclaimed myself, and in doing so, I had become impossible to ignore. Months passed. Winter returned. Snow dusted the city streets, and Portland took on a quiet, reflective beauty. I spent evenings reading by the window, sipping tea, and journaling about life, love, and growth. I continued my work with the community center, helping young people find their voices. I ran, hiked, cooked, traveled, and nurtured relationships that honored my boundaries and values. Claire remained by my side, a gentle presence that didn't demand, didn't rush, and didn't control. With her, love felt steady, natural, and effortless. One snowy evening, as we walked back from a small art gallery, she looked up at me and asked, "Do you ever think about her? About Ava?" I paused, looking at the softly falling snow, the city lights reflecting in white flakes. And I said, honestly, sometimes. But not in a way that hurts me. I think of her as a chapter that taught me who I am, and how to survive, and how to love. That chapter is closed. And now, I am here, fully, present, alive. She smiled, squeezing my hand. I like that answer. and I did too. Finally, I understood the lesson heartbreak had been trying to teach me all along. Love isn't just about passion, desire, or attachment. It's about understanding, growth, and self-worth. It's about reclaiming your voice, your power, and your life after someone leaves. It's about rising when you're broken and refusing to be silenced. It's about showing up fully for yourself first and only then for someone else. And in that understanding, I realized that the greatest love story I could ever live wasn't with Ava or anyone else. It was with myself. Because the man who had once been broken, silenced, and lost had grown into someone strong, whole, and alive. And that man, he was impossible to ignore.